So we've been talking about the 6 elements of organizational structures. What were they? Work specialization, departmentalization, chain of command, span of control, level of centralization, and formalization. So let's look at some organizations and how they fit into those classifications. And let's use the work of Derek Pugh. So he was a British psychologist and professor of international management. And he said you could classify organizations based on 3 things. What he called the structuring of activities, so how much of an employee's behavior is defined and standardized. So which of the 6 that we've been talking about would that be? Right? That is the formalization. So let's translate his work into what we've been discussing here. Then we have the concentration of authority. Who makes the decisions? So that's going to be our centralization. And then we have what he calls line control of workflow. So line control of workflow is when you have a small number of subordinates per supervisor. So which of the 6 is that? Right? Span of control. So he's calling line control, that's going to be our narrow span. Okay, so let's take his work and let's translate it into what we've been talking about in the previous videos and what he found in terms of what certain businesses are likely to have in terms of their organizational structure. So Pugh first looked at different characteristics of companies and what they were more likely to have. So structuring of activities, remember that's going to be the formalization. And line control is going to be narrow span. So what he found is that older firms and bigger firms were more likely to be formalized, have more structure, have more rules and processes. Unionized organizations were more likely to have rules and structure. Okay. He created this table here, or box, that shows the trade-off between the 2. So here we have centralized. Here we have decentralized. All right, so our structured is going to be the formalization. So unstructured would be less formal, less rules. Then we have line control, so that's going to be our narrow span. And what he calls impersonal control, that's going to be wide span. Lots of people under each manager. Oops. Try that again. Wide span. All right, so then he names a number of different types of organizations: implicitly structured, pre-workflow bureaucracy, full bureaucracy, and so on. So let's translate those. What does he mean by these different ones? Well, let's start with the government. So when he talks about public sector, government work, that's the full bureaucracy. So government entities tend to be more centralized, right? We are higher up in the box, so we're more centralized, more formalized, so more rules and procedures. And we can see here a wider span of control. So more people working for a single manager is how governments tend to be structured, and government-owned organizations. We also have what he calls nascent full bureaucracy, but this is crown corporations, like Canada Post. So notice the difference between Canada Post and the government itself. They are still both more centralized in decision-making. They are both more of a wider span. The difference is the level of structure or formalization. So crown corporations, which are government-owned businesses that act independently, have less in terms of rules and structure than government entities. All right, let's look at some of these other ones here. Let's look at the family-owned business. That's what he calls here implicitly structured. So the family business is less formal, right? Not a lot of rules and processes, is going to be more likely to be decentralized in his view. So maybe it's the family each has the authority to make decisions. We talked about how if you have a family business, you might be more likely to make it centralized, so that you can avoid some of the family conflict by having the head of the household or whomever be the central authority for decision making. But from Pugh's perspective, he says family businesses tend to be more decentralized. Okay. And we can see it's a narrower span. So less people working below each individual. And we talked already about it being less structured or formal. We can look at others. This one that he calls personnel bureaucracy is basically as the family business becomes a smaller business, hires external people to the family to work for them, you'll move into more of a centralized authority. And you may add on things like an HR department. So as your business first starts to expand, you turn more into that personnel bureaucracy from, say, that family business. We can compare that to an SME, a small or medium enterprise. So small business here or medium business. Notice that, again, they're still going to be less structured, less formal. Okay. Here we're getting a wider span than, say, with the family business, but we're still more decentralized in our approach. And we can then look at large-scale manufacturing. That would be this workflow bureaucracy. In this case, notice that it's highly formalized, large-scale manufacturing. If we're looking at producing beef, we're talking about making cars, we're talking about, working at Amazon. They tend to be more unionized. So again, they're going to be more rules, more formalization. Large-scale manufacturing, the work specialization is very specialized, which means we can have a wider span for our span of control. And here, when you look at the large-scale manufacturing, because they might be quite spread out geographically or have a number of different product lines, then there may be some decentralization there. All right, the last one that we haven't talked about is subsidiaries. So if you're part of a bigger organization, you'll notice that you're very similar to that large-scale manufacturing with maybe slightly less formalization in terms of rules and procedures. When we look at the organizational structure that we choose, we look at what type of business we want to have. We look at our different elements of organizational structure. So I've just gone through those slides there. And as we make a decision as to what type of organizational structure or how we're going to meet these different six elements, there are some models for making that final decision. And so the process of developing or changing an organizational structure, that's what's called organizational design. And there are some models for organizational design. And really what they come to is about aligning those decisions about the 6 elements with other aspects of your organization. So there's what is called the Galbraith star model. So this is a US professor of organizational design. And his view is that organizational structure needs to align with the people that you have. So based on their skills and how they function, you choose an organizational structure. What are your processes? What kind of rewards or incentive systems do you have? That will determine your organizational structure. So really it's about alignment with other aspects of your organization, from people's motivations and skills to the vision you have for your organization in terms of the strategy. What are we trying to accomplish? There is another model for framework for determining that organizational structure, And again, it's emphasizing the skills of the employees, the strategy of your organization. So this is the Mckenzie 7S framework. We have our hard S's, our structure, our system, and our strategies, and our soft S's, our skills, our staff, and our culture or style of the organization. So it's these together that will ultimately determine who makes the decisions. Centralized, decentralized. How many people work for a particular manager? How formalized are we in terms of rules and procedures? That's going to depend on that bigger piece in terms of who are we, what are we trying to be, and what are we made of in terms of our people and how they function the best. If we're looking at Mckenzie S, you can see an example here to check that alignment of strategy, structure, skills, staff, style, and their shared values. So all of these must work together. Before we move past here our organizational structure and these elements, we'll just look at the organizational structure assessment that is in the Pearson-Revel Robbins textbook. And this one looks at organizational structure in terms of a bit different components. So this one looks at the organization's individualism versus collectivism. So what is the culture like in terms of working independent or in teams? How much power distance is there? So are you in close connection to your superiors, or are you working at a distance from them? So how involved is your manager in your daily life? What is the level of uncertainty avoidance? So is the organization engaged in creativity and innovative problem solving? Do they like dealing with new and novel problems? And then proximity. How close are people physically to their coworkers? So sometimes the work rate is distance. We work from home, work virtually, versus everyone being in the same room together. We talked before about how that proximity, physical proximity of coworkers can inform that span of control. So in this particular survey, it's asking about your preferences and then comparing you to how foreign companies, domestic companies, and then joint ventures, which are teams of companies, perhaps foreign and domestic together, to see how you compare. So you're in the dark blue and you can see the others here. So which ones do you more align with in terms of some of their organizational structure? There's not a lot of difference here in terms of the foreign, joint venture, and domestic. So in order to kind of see which one you more align with is a bit difficult based on this survey. So I'm not sure this one is super helpful.